In the shadowed heart of an old European city, nestled between crooked lanes and fog-drenched rooftops, stood a forgotten antique shop. Its windows were clouded with dust, its shelves lined with relics that whispered of lives long gone. The sign above the door read A. Thorn Sons, Curiosities and Keepsakes, though no one had seen a son there for decades. Only the old man remained, thin, gray, and silent, a keeper of other people's ghosts. It was there, on a rain-drenched evening, that Elena Marin, a young historian with an obsession for forgotten love stories, found herself seeking shelter. She pushed open the door, the bell above it ringing a dull, melancholy chime that seemed to echo longer than it should have. Inside, the air smelled of wax and time. Candles flickered over tarnished silver, glass domes, and portraits of faces whose eyes seemed almost alive. Elena's attention was caught by a faint glimmer on a velvet tray, a brooch unlike any she had ever seen. It was oval, framed in gold filigree so delicate it looked spun by spiders. On one side, a miniature painting showed a woman's face, serene, radiant, filled with love. On the reverse, when the brooch was turned, the same woman appeared again, but her expression was different. Her eyes glistened with tears, her lips twisted in pain. It was the same face, yet divided by a cruel mirror of emotion. Love and betrayal, locked forever in metal and paint. The shopkeeper, who had been watching her in silence, finally spoke. "Beautiful, isn't it?" he said, his voice dry like old parchment. "That brooch once belonged to Countess Elara Voss. They say it was painted for her by her lover, and cursed by her husband." Elena looked up. "Cursed?" she asked, half smiling. The old man nodded slowly. "Every owner since has met with misfortune. Love that turned to ruin. Faith that turned to treachery. They say the brooch doesn't just show two faces, it decides which one you'll see." Despite his warning, or perhaps because of it, Elena bought the brooch. There was something magnetic about it, as though the painted eyes followed her even after she closed the lid of the box. That night, in her small apartment overlooking the cathedral square, Elena placed the brooch on her desk. Rain pattered softly against the windows, and the bells tolled midnight. The candlelight flickered, making the painted face seem almost alive. She traced the edges gently with her fingertip. The gold was cold, but the center, where the miniature was set, felt strangely warm, like a pulse beneath the surface. As she turned it between her fingers, she thought she heard a whisper. A woman's voice, faint, sorrowful. "Do not trust the one who smiles." Elena froze, heart pounding. But when she looked around, the room was still. Only the brooch glimmered faintly in the candlelight. She laughed nervously, convincing herself it was her imagination. She'd spent too many nights reading tragic love letters in dusty archives. She placed the brooch on her dressing table and went to bed. That night, she dreamed. She stood in a vast ballroom lit by 1,000 candles. Musicians played softly, and couples danced beneath crystal chandeliers. At the center of it all stood Countess Elara Voss, radiant in ivory silk. Her laughter was light, but her eyes carried the ache of secrets. Beside her was a man in a painter's coat, his fingers stained with color, Lucien, the artist. His gaze toward Elara was filled with devotion, but also fear, and watching from the shadows stood another man, Lord Voss, her husband. A ring of gold flashed on his gloved hand, and in his eyes, a darkness coiled. As the dance slowed, Lucien approached Elara. He handed her a small box, and when she opened it, the brooch glimmered, the very same one. "For every joy, a sorrow," he whispered. "Two faces, two truths. One for what we show the world. And one for what we hide." Elara smiled sadly. "And which one is real?" Before Lucian could answer, Lord Voss appeared behind her, his voice like steel. Whichever one survives the night. The music stopped. The dream shattered like glass. Elena woke in a cold sweat. The brooch was no longer on her table, it was pinned to her nightgown. The next morning, she wore the brooch to her university lecture. Her colleague, Professor Adrian Wells, noticed it immediately. "That's exquisite," he said, leaning close. "May I?" Elena hesitated, but handed it to him. Adrian examined it, his eyes narrowing. "Elara Voss," he murmured. "I've read about her, a noblewoman accused of poisoning her husband in the late 1800s. The painter she loved disappeared soon after." He looked up at her, a peculiar intensity in his gaze. "Where did you find this?" "In a little antique shop," she replied. "Thorn Sons." Adrian's face changed slightly, as though he recognized the name. "That shop burned down," he said softly, 10 years ago. Elena stared at him. "That's not possible. I was there last night." But when she returned that evening to prove it, the lane was empty. The shop's door was gone, the windows boarded. Only the faint outline of letters remained on the cracked sign, "Thorn Sons." Her hands trembled as she touched the charred wood. Inside, all was dark and silent. The brooch in her pocket throbbed with heat. As if it were alive, days passed, and the line between dream and waking began to blur. Sometimes she saw Elara in mirrors, her eyes filled with unspoken sorrow. Sometimes she heard Lucian's voice calling from behind closed doors, and sometimes, when she held the brooch, she could feel someone else's heartbeat within it. One evening, while combing through old letters in the university archives, she found one sealed with crimson wax, the crest of House Voss pressed into it. It was Elara's handwriting, elegant but trembling. "He painted my heart, and my doom. The brooch was meant to bind us in love, but his hand trembled when he finished the second face. He said it was only to show that all beauty hides pain. Yet the night he betrayed me, I saw my reflection twist into the other side. It smiled when I wept. The brooch remembers." Elena's fingers shook as she traced the ink. The words seemed to whisper themselves aloud. She could almost hear Elara's voice, desperate, broken, as if she were trapped inside the gold. That night, Elena dreamed again, but this time she saw the ending, Lucian in his studio, the smell of oil and turpentine. Elara standing beside him, pale and shaking. "Tell me it isn't true," she whispered. "Tell me you didn't take his money." Lucian turned, guilt shadowing his face. "He found out about us. He said he'd destroy you, unless I betrayed you first." Elara's tears fell onto the wet paint. "You painted my love on one side. And my ruin on the other." Her hand trembled as she lifted a vial from her sleeve, the same poison she'd been accused of using. But she didn't drink it. She pressed it into Lucian's hand. "You chose your side. Now the brooch will choose mine." The room darkened. Paint bled across the canvas like spreading veins. And when Lucian's body fell, the brooch glowed on her chest, both faces weeping. Elena awoke screaming. The brooch on her nightstand had cracked down the center. And from the crack seeped a faint line of red, like blood. By the next morning, Adrian's obsession had deepened. He appeared at her door again, his expression gaunt, sleepless. "Elena, listen to me," he said. "You have to destroy it. The brooch, it binds love to death. It's not an object. It's a memory that feeds." She shook her head. "It's part of history, Adrian. You don't destroy history." His voice rose. "It's not history, it's hunger. When he reached for her hand, she saw something flicker in his eyes, a reflection of the brooch's darker face, and then she understood. It wasn't just the brooch that remembered betrayal, it repeated it. That night, the storm returned, wind howled through the cathedral square. Candles went out one by one. Adrian forced his way into her apartment, desperate, shouting her name. "The brooch has chosen," he cried. "It's chosen you." Elena held it tightly, the pin biting into her skin. "Stay away from me." The brooch pulsed like a living heart. The air turned cold, and then, a voice, clear, furious, unmistakably feminine, filled the room. "He betrayed me once. Now all who bear his blood will answer." Adrian screamed. His shadow twisted against the walls, stretching long and distorted. The brooch blazed in white light. And when it dimmed, only Elena stood, trembling, staring at the gold that had cooled once more. On one side, Elara's face smiled faintly, on the other, Adrian's, his features frozen in horror. Elena fell to her knees, sobbing. She hurled the brooch into the fire, where it glowed red-hot before turning black, but when dawn came, and she sifted through the ashes, the brooch was gone. Months later, Elena left the city. No one heard from her again. Some said she went mad. Others whispered that she became the new keeper of the brooch, its next memory. Years passed, and in a quiet antique shop on the edge of Vienna, a new owner placed a golden brooch on velvet. The sign read, "A. Thorn Sons, Curiosities and Keepsakes." A young woman entered, smiling. She picked up the brooch and pinned it to her coat. "It's beautiful," she said. The shopkeeper smiled faintly. "Yes," he murmured. "It always is, at first." Outside, snow fell gently. Inside, the painted eyes on the brooch blinked, one side smiling, the other weeping.